There's something happening inside the avoidant that they will never voluntarily tell you. Something that exists in direct, almost painful contradiction to how they behave toward you. Because on the surface, in their actions, in their distance, in their withdrawal, in the way they seem unbothered when you know something is happening underneath, they look like someone who is fine, someone who has their emotions managed, someone who doesn't need you the way you might need them. And that presentation is so convincing, so consistent, so apparently effortless that most people eventually believe it. They conclude that the avoidance simply doesn't feel as much, doesn't want as much, isn't as affected. That conclusion is wrong. And understanding exactly how wrong it is, understanding what's actually happening inside them while they're performing composure on the outside, is going to change everything about how you interpret their behavior, your effect on them, and what they're hiding from you, with a discipline that costs them more than you've ever been allowed to see. Here's the truth they're concealing. You drive them absolutely wild. Not in the distant, managed way they present, in a consuming, destabilizing, almost overwhelming way that their entire behavioral system is organized around containing. You are not someone they feel mildly about. You are not someone they can take or leave. You are not the casual, easy presence their behavior implies. You are the thing their nervous system is most activated by, most drawn to, and most terrified of, simultaneously, constantly, in ways they can't fully control, even when their behavior looks perfectly controlled. And they will not tell you this. They will perform composure while experiencing chaos. They will create distance while craving closeness. They will withdraw from the exact thing they want most. And if you don't understand why, if you don't understand the specific psychology underneath the behavior, you will keep misreading their distance as indifference when it's actually the most complicated form of intense feeling you've ever been the object of. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you about what they're hiding, why they're hiding it, and what it reveals about your effect on them, this reframes everything. The performance of composure and what it's actually costing them. Let's start here because this is the foundation everything else builds on. The avoidance composure is not natural. It is not evidence of lesser feeling. It is a performance, a highly developed, long-practiced, neurologically reinforced performance that requires enormous ongoing effort to maintain, especially around someone who affects them the way you affect them. Understanding where this performance comes from is essential. The avoidant learned, usually very early, that emotional expression was dangerous. Not dangerous in the abstract way we use that word casually. Dangerous in the literal, formative, this determines whether I am safe sense that a child experiences danger. Maybe emotional expression was met with dismissal. They showed need, and need was ignored, teaching them that need is pointless. Maybe it was met with overwhelm. They expressed feeling, and the adult around them couldn't handle it, teaching them that their emotions are too much for others to hold. Maybe it was met with inconsistency. Sometimes expression was received, sometimes it was punished, creating the particular anxiety of never knowing whether vulnerability would be safe or catastrophic. Whatever the specific mechanism, the lesson was the same. Emotions are not safe to show. Composure is protection. Distance is survival. And so they built the system. They developed the ability to feel intensely while displaying neutrally, to want desperately while behaving casually, to be profoundly affected while performing unaffected. This system saved them when they were young. It was adaptive, functional, genuinely protective in the environment that created it. The problem is that they're still running the same system in adult relationships where the original danger no longer exists, where the person in front of them is not the dismissive or overwhelmed or inconsistent caregiver, but is someone who is actually available, actually capable of receiving their emotions, actually safe in ways the original environment was not. They're using childhood armor in an adult world that doesn't require it. And the armor doesn't just protect them from potential hurt, it prevents them from receiving what they actually need, which is the very thing you're trying to offer them. Around you specifically, the cost of maintaining the performance escalates dramatically. Because you're not someone who makes composure easy to maintain. You're someone who reaches past the surface, who asks real questions, who brings real presence, who creates genuine connection in moments they can't fully defend against. You make their system work harder, and the harder their system has to work, the more energy they're spending on containment. Energy that could be going toward actually being with you, actually receiving what you're offering, actually building what both of you can sense is possible between you. This is the first thing they're hiding. How hard it is to be around you and remain defended. How much effort it takes to maintain distance from someone who makes distance feel like loss. What they actually feel when they're with you. Here's what's happening internally when the avoidant is in your presence. And I want to be specific because the specificity matters. They feel pulled. Not gently, not mildly, not in the manageable way they'd prefer. They feel genuinely, uncomfortably, powerfully pulled toward you, toward your energy, toward the specific way you exist in space, toward whatever it is about you that they've never been able to fully rationalize or dismiss. This pull is physical as much as emotional, a kind of orientation toward you that happens automatically, below decision-making, before they've had the chance to remind themselves that closeness is dangerous. Their body moves toward you before their defenses catch up. And the moment the defenses catch up, the moment their system registers how strongly they're being pulled, the anxiety arrives. Not mild discomfort, genuine anxiety rooted in the old equation their nervous system learned. Wanting this much means being vulnerable to losing it, and being vulnerable to losing it is the most dangerous thing available. So the pull and the anxiety arrive together simultaneously, creating the specific internal contradiction that defines avoidant experience of attraction. I want this more than almost anything, and wanting this much terrifies me beyond what I can comfortably sit with. What do you do with that experience? If you're an avoidant, you do what you've always done with overwhelming internal experience. You contain it. You create behavioral distance to manage the internal closeness. You withdraw physically or emotionally to regulate the anxiety that your own desire for connection is creating. You become cooler precisely when you're feeling warmer, more distant, precisely when you're feeling closer, more defended, precisely when you're most wanting to be open. This is what looks like indifference. This is what reads as not caring. This is the behavior that makes you question your effect on them, wonder if you're imagining the connection, doubt whether what you sense between you is real or wishful thinking. But it's not indifference. It's the behavioral signature of someone who is feeling too much and has only one learned strategy for managing too much, which is to create the appearance of feeling nothing. They're also experiencing something they would never name to you, possibly something they can barely name to themselves. They think about you constantly, not occasionally, not when something reminds them of you. Constantly. You occupy mental space in their life that is wildly disproportionate to what their behavior suggests. They replay conversations with you. They analyze what you said and what they said in return. They imagine scenarios involving you, future ones, alternate versions of past ones, conversations they haven't had yet. They notice things during their day that they instinctively want to tell you. They hear a song, or read something, or experience something, and their first thought is, you. You are woven into the texture of their daily consciousness in a way that they guard from you completely. Because revealing how much you occupy their mind would reveal how much they need you, and revealing need is the thing their entire system is designed to prevent. This is the second thing they're hiding: the volume of internal space you occupy, how often you appear in their thoughts without invitation, how thoroughly you've gotten past defenses that were designed to keep exactly this from happening. The specific things they will never say to you, and why. Let's get precise about what they're withholding, because this is where it gets most important. They will never tell you that you're the person they compare everyone else to, that new people, other connections, potential alternatives all get measured against you, and the measuring reveals every time that you're operating at a level others don't reach. They can't tell you this because telling you would give you power, would reveal preference, would acknowledge that you occupy a position in their internal hierarchy that they haven't consciously decided to give you. The comparison happens involuntarily. The conclusion arrives without their permission, and they keep it from you because knowing it would change the dynamic in ways their anxiety can't tolerate. They will never tell you that your absence is felt immediately and specifically, that when you go quiet, when you pull back, when you stop reaching, the silence lands in them with a weight that's completely inconsistent with how they've been behaving. They notice your absence more than your presence because your presence they've been managing and containing and defending against. But your absence can't be defended against. It simply exists as removal, as void, as the specific shape of what they've been trying not to need. The silence after you stop reaching tells them something their behavior has been trying to prevent them from knowing. They need this. They need you. And that knowledge, arriving unbidden through your absence, is genuinely destabilizing. They will never tell you that the moments of real connection, the ones that slip through the defenses before they can prevent them, the moments where something true passes between you without either of you planning it, that those moments are what they think about most, while they're performing composure, while they're creating distance, while they're doing everything their system tells them to do to stay safe. They're carrying those moments, privately, carefully, in a way they've never acknowledged to you, because acknowledging it would mean admitting that the connection is real, that it matters, that you've gotten through in ways they've been trying to prevent you from getting through. They will never tell you that your confidence, when you have it, when you stop reaching and start living your own life fully, does something to them that their managed indifference simply cannot replicate. Your confidence doesn't just attract them. It destabilizes them in a specific way that their anxiety cannot easily manage. Because when you're pursuing them, when you're clearly affected and working to create connection, their system can manage that. It knows how to respond to pursuit with distance, knows how to use your obvious need as evidence that distance is appropriate. But when you stop pursuing, when you seem genuinely fine, when your life is full and you're engaged with it, and they're not the organizing principle of your emotional world, that's when something in their managed system cracks. Because indifference, they can meet with indifference. But your genuine thriving, your actual okayness without them, that contradicts the story their defenses tell about what you need from them. And contradiction creates the exact instability that their system is worst at handling. They will never tell you that they're afraid of you, not in a dramatic sense. In the specific sense that someone is afraid of anything that has genuine power over them, you have power over them. Real, involuntary, unmanaged power that arrived without their permission and resists their attempts to contain it. And power that can't be controlled is frightening to someone whose entire psychological architecture is built around maintaining control of their emotional environment. You represent the place where their control fails. Of course they're afraid of you. Of course they manage that fear through behavior that looks like it has nothing to do with fear. Fear in the avoidant doesn't look like trembling. It looks like distance. It looks like composure. It looks like suddenly becoming very interested in something else, right when the connection between you is becoming real. Why they hide these things? The psychology underneath the concealment. Understanding what they're hiding is one thing. Understanding why they're hiding it with such apparent ease, such consistent discipline, such convincing performance, that's what actually changes your understanding of the entire situation. The concealment isn't primarily about you. This is crucial. They're not hiding their feelings because they've calculated that withholding will benefit them relationally, or because they're deliberately trying to create confusion in you, or because they don't trust you specifically. They're hiding their feelings because that is what their nervous system automatically does with feelings that feel threatening. And the threat isn't you, it's the feeling itself. The intensity of what they feel around you is the threat. You're just the source of the feeling. When you feel something overwhelming, and your system has learned that overwhelming feeling is dangerous, you don't distinguish between safe and unsafe overwhelming feelings. The nervous system responds to intensity, not to the specific content of the intensity. So the fact that what they feel around you is attraction and connection and genuine care rather than grief or fear, their nervous system registers the intensity and responds the same way it responds to any threat. Contain it, manage it, create distance from the source. They're also hiding these things because full disclosure would require a level of vulnerability that their system experiences as existential threat. To say, I think about you constantly, is to hand someone a significant portion of your internal world and trust them not to use it carelessly. To say, your absence affects me immediately and specifically, is to admit need in a direct and unmistakable way. To say, I compare everyone to you and no one measures up, is to acknowledge preference so strong it borders on dependence. Every one of these disclosures requires tolerating the exposure of genuine need, and tolerating that exposure is exactly what their developmental history made impossible. This is not weakness disguised as strength, it's genuine incapacity. The specific incapacity of someone whose nervous system learned that need makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability leads to pain. They're not choosing to hide what they feel in the way you might choose to hold something back, strategically. They're doing the only thing their system knows how to do with feelings this intense: conceal them behind behavior that suggests the feelings don't exist, what your effect on them actually means, and what it doesn't. Here's where honesty becomes most important, because this is the part that's most likely to be misread in a direction that hurts you. The fact that you drive them wild, the fact that you affect them intensely, that they're hiding significant feeling, that your effect on them is real and powerful and involuntary, this is meaningful. It's not nothing. It's not your imagination. The connection you sense is real. Your impact on them is real. The feeling between you, however asymmetrically it's being expressed, is real. But intensity of feeling is not readiness for relationship. These are separate things that people consistently conflate because we're culturally conditioned to believe that if someone feels strongly enough, behavior will follow. That if the feeling is real enough, they'll find the capacity. That if you're patient enough, the intensity of what they feel will eventually override the patterns. This conflation is where people get hurt most deeply. Not by absence of feeling, but by the gap between feeling and capacity, the gap between how much someone affects them and what they're able to do about it. The avoidant is not hiding their feelings because they haven't felt enough yet. They're not one conversation away from the feeling finally becoming strong enough to override the patterns. The feelings are already overwhelming. The intensity is already there. What's missing is not more feeling. What's missing is the therapeutic work that would develop their capacity to act differently despite the anxiety the feeling creates. Feeling and capacity are separate. Feeling is what's happening inside them. Capacity is what's been developed through sustained therapeutic work. You can be the most intensely felt presence in someone's life and still be treated in ways that don't honor that intensity, because the intensity is happening in one part of their psychology and the behavior is being driven by another part entirely, a part that responds to anxiety rather than to desire. What your effect on them means is this: you are genuinely extraordinary. You're not imagining the connection. You're not projecting significance onto something ordinary. What you sense between you is real, and their internal experience confirms it. That's important for you to know. Not so you'll wait for them to be ready, but so you'll carry accurate self-knowledge forward. You are someone who drives people wild in the specific, significant, involuntary way that is rare and worth knowing about yourself. What it doesn't mean is that their feeling creates obligation on your part to wait for capacity they haven't developed. What it doesn't mean is that the intensity of what's happening between you is sufficient foundation for a relationship that requires more than intensity to function. What it doesn't mean is that you should interpret their hidden feeling as hidden readiness. The trap that catches most people and how to avoid it. Once you know they're hiding significant feeling, once you understand that their composure is performance and their distance is anxiety and their withdrawal is the opposite of indifference, the trap opens up. The trap looks like this. If their behavior is a performance and the real feeling is underneath, then maybe the solution is to get to the real feeling. To create conditions safe enough that the performance becomes unnecessary. To love them in ways that prove vulnerability is safe. To be patient enough, understanding enough, constant enough that their system finally relaxes and the feeling they've been hiding becomes feeling they can express. This is the trap, and it catches extraordinary people. Specifically, it catches people with high empathy and high capacity for understanding. People who can see beneath surface behavior to what's underneath. People whose love is strong enough to attempt the sustained effort required to create safety for someone defended. It catches you because you understand them, because you can see what's underneath, because you believe in what's possible between you, and because all of that makes the strategy feel not just reasonable, but obvious. The problem isn't the love. The problem is the assignment. The person best positioned to help the avoidant access what they're hiding is not their partner. It's their therapist. The work of dismantling the defensive system, of creating new neural pathways that allow vulnerability without triggering threat responses, of healing the original wounds that made the system necessary, of developing the capacity to tolerate closeness without automatically creating distance. This work requires professional support, delivered in conditions where the therapeutic relationship itself isn't at stake. When you try to do this work as their partner, you're working in the hardest possible conditions. You're the source of the intensity that's activating their system, which means you can't simultaneously be the safe, neutral presence that helps them work through what the intensity is triggering. You can be safe. You can be patient. You can create the most consistent, accepting, non-threatening relational environment available. And they'll still need to do the actual work with someone else, in a therapist's office, over months and years, in the absence of the romantic stakes that make the work harder. Your patience can support their willingness to seek that work, but your patience cannot replace that work. And if you stay indefinitely, offering unlimited patience while they're not seeking the work, you're not creating conditions for their growth. You're creating conditions for comfortable stagnation, where the hidden feeling remains hidden and the patterns remain unchanged, because there's no consequence sufficient to motivate the difficult work of change. What to do with everything you now know. You know they're hiding significant feeling. You know your effect on them is real and powerful. You know the composure is performance and the distance is anxiety and the withdrawal is complicated feeling rather than absence of feeling. You know the specific things they'll never say and why they'll never say them. Now what? The answer is genuinely counterintuitive and genuinely important. Use this knowledge to free yourself, not to re-engage. Here's what I mean. Most people, when they discover that someone who's been distant is actually hiding intense feeling, interpret that discovery as invitation, as reason to try again, to reach out, to offer one more chance at the connection that seems so tantalizingly close. The hidden feeling becomes evidence that what they've been working toward was real, which it was, and therefore that continuing to work toward it makes sense, which it doesn't, not without the other person doing their own work simultaneously. Use this knowledge instead to complete something in yourself, to close the chapter of self-doubt that their behavior opened. Every time they were cool when you were warm, every time they created distance when you were seeking closeness, every time their behavior made you wonder whether you were imagining the connection, that was their system managing intensity, not evidence of your misperception. You weren't wrong. The connection was real. Your instincts were accurate. Their behavior was telling you about their psychology, not about your worth or your effect or the validity of what you were sensing. Let that settle into your self-knowledge and stay there permanently. Use it to understand what to require going forward, not just from potential partners, but from yourself. Specifically, the part of yourself that is capable of loving someone so well, so thoroughly, so generously, that you make it very easy for someone defended to stay defended. Your capacity for understanding and empathy and sustained love is genuinely extraordinary. It's also, in the context of avoidant relationships, a double-edged gift, because you make it possible for someone defended to remain comfortable while defended. You absorb the cost of their patterns with such grace that the patterns face no natural consequence. Going forward, let your extraordinary love be offered in conditions where it can be fully received, where the person across from you has the capacity to meet what you're bringing with something equivalent, where your generosity creates flourishing rather than enabling comfortable stagnation. And use it to trust yourself. Your instincts about connection were right. Your sense of what was possible between you was accurate. Your perception of the feeling underneath their behavior was not wishful thinking. It was sophisticated emotional reading of a real situation. The problem was never your perception. Trust that perception going forward. Trust it when it tells you connection is real. Trust it equally when it tells you that real connection and relational readiness are different things, and that someone who drives you wild is not automatically someone who can love you safely, the person who will show you everything they feel. Without hiding, the avoidant drives you wild too. That's worth acknowledging. The intensity of what exists between you, the pull of something that feels significant, the specific electricity of connection with someone defended. It's not ordinary. It doesn't feel ordinary. And part of what makes moving forward difficult is the fear that what comes next will be ordinary by comparison. That leaving the intensity of this means settling for something less charged, less alive, less significant. I want to address that fear directly because it matters. The intensity you've experienced in this dynamic is real, but it's partly an artifact of the dynamic itself. Specifically, it's the intensity that comes from pursuing something that keeps moving, from sensing connection that keeps getting withdrawn, from wanting something that remains perpetually just out of reach. This is a particular kind of intensity. It's the intensity of anxiety as much as the intensity of love. It's heightened by uncertainty, by inconsistency, by the neurological activation that comes from variable reward. The feeling is real, but some portion of its charge comes from the chase, from the uncertainty, from the specific texture of wanting something defended. Real love, love with someone who has actual capacity, who is consistently present, who can receive what you're offering and reflect it back, has its own intensity, a different kind. Not the anxious intensity of pursuit, but the grounded intensity of genuine mutual recognition. Two people who both see each other clearly and both have the capacity to honor what they see. That intensity doesn't have the electric charge of uncertainty, but it has something better, something more sustaining. The deepening that comes from two people who choose each other with full information and full capacity, consistently, over time. The person who will show you everything they feel without hiding, who will let you see the intensity of their feeling in real time rather than concealing it behind managed composure. That person is not a lesser version of what you've experienced. They're the completed version, the version where the intensity and the capacity finally exist in the same person at the same time, where you don't have to read between the lines or interpret distance or wonder what's really happening underneath, where what's underneath is simply available to you, offered freely, held without the elaborate concealment that has cost both you and the avoidant so much. That person exists. They are not a consolation prize for giving up on what could have been. They are what the avoidant would have been if they'd done the work. They have the feeling and they have the capacity, and the combination of those two things in one person, directed fully toward you, is not less than what you've experienced. It's more. Finally, sustainably, safely more. You drove the avoidant wild. They hid it from you with the discipline of someone who learned that hiding is survival. And somewhere, someone is going to feel what the avoidant felt, that consuming, destabilizing, involuntary wild. And instead of hiding it, they're going to show you. Consistently, clearly, without performance or concealment or managed composure. Wait for that. Require that. Not because what you had wasn't real, it was, but because real feeling shown to you openly by someone with the capacity to show it is the only version that actually becomes the relationship you deserve. You deserve to be someone's greatest feeling and their greatest expression of feeling at the same time, not their greatest secret. And I want to stay with that distinction, greatest feeling versus greatest secret, because it captures something essential about what this dynamic actually costs you that doesn't get named often enough. Being someone's secret is its own particular kind of loneliness. It's the loneliness of knowing something significant exists between you while being unable to reference it openly, unable to build on it, unable to have it acknowledged in the direct, unambiguous way that makes connection feel real rather than like something you're partly imagining. You've been living in the gap between what you sense and what gets confirmed, between what you feel and what gets reflected back, between the connection that exists underneath everything and the behavior that consistently denies it. That gap is exhausting in a way that's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it, because from the outside, the relationship might not look dramatic. There might not be obvious conflict or clear cruelty or visible dysfunction. What there is instead is a sustained, low-grade, deeply wearing experience of reaching toward something that keeps almost arriving and never fully does. Of being close enough to feel the warmth, but not close enough to actually be held. Of sensing that something real is there while never being given enough confirmation to stop wondering whether you're right. That particular exhaustion is what the next relationship won't have. Not because relationships are easy or because the right person will never create confusion, but because someone with genuine capacity doesn't require you to sustain yourself on almost. They give you the actual thing, and the relief of clear, confirmed, openly expressed feeling from someone who has both the depth to feel it and the capacity to show it. That relief is something you can't fully anticipate until you experience it, until you realize how much energy you were spending on the interpretation, on the reading between lines, on the sustained effort of loving someone who couldn't let themselves be loved back in the open. The long shadow. This dynamic casts and how to step out of it. Here's something that doesn't get discussed enough about relationships with avoidance. They cast a long shadow. Long after the relationship has ended, long after the intellectual understanding has arrived, long after you can explain clearly and accurately what happened and why. The shadow persists. It shows up in specific ways that are worth naming, so you can recognize them when they appear, rather than being confused by them. It shows up in hypervigilance about withdrawal. In new connections, you'll notice yourself monitoring for early signs of the pattern you learned to anticipate. Watching response times, interpreting a day of quiet as potential withdrawal. Reading ordinary human inconsistency as evidence of avoidance. This monitoring isn't irrational. It was adaptive in the previous dynamic, where reading the signals accurately was essential to managing your own emotional state. But in a new dynamic, with someone who is simply living their life, and occasionally less communicative, because that's how life works, the hypervigilance will create false alarms, will make ordinary variance feel like danger, will cause you to brace for abandonment in moments that don't actually contain it. The shadow also shows up in difficulty receiving consistent care. When someone is reliably present, when they follow through without you having to manage it, when they initiate without you having to create the conditions for initiation, when they're emotionally available on an ordinary Tuesday for no particular reason, something in you might resist it, might find it slightly unreal, might wait for the withdrawal that previous experience taught you follows the closeness. This isn't cynicism. It's a nervous system that learned a particular rhythm of closeness and withdrawal and keeps anticipating the withdrawal even when it's not coming. You'll find yourself almost wanting to create the withdrawal, pulling back slightly to test whether they'll pursue, creating small distance to see whether it gets matched or bridged. Not because you want the old dynamic, but because your system was calibrated to it, and unfamiliar terrain, even good unfamiliar terrain, creates its own low-level anxiety, and the shadow shows up in the specific vulnerability to anyone who reminds you of them. Not necessarily in obvious ways, not necessarily someone with the same personality or the same patterns, but someone who creates the same pull, the same sense of depth behind composure, the same feeling that there's something significant underneath that isn't being fully expressed. That particular combination will always feel electric to you now, because you learned what electricity feels like in the context of that combination. The risk is mistaking the familiar electricity for the right electricity, returning to the dynamic because it feels like intensity when it's actually just the specific intensity of a pattern you've already lived. Recognizing the shadow doesn't mean you're broken or that healing hasn't happened. It means you're human and that significant experiences leave marks. The goal isn't to eliminate the shadow. It's to develop enough awareness that the shadow doesn't make decisions for you, that you can notice the hypervigilance without acting from it, that you can receive consistent care while your nervous system recalibrates to understanding that reliability is safe, that you can feel the familiar electricity with someone defended and consciously choose not to organize your life around trying to reach through it. What you actually learned from loving them. There's something worth recovering from this experience before you leave it entirely behind. Not something to be grateful for in the toxic positivity sense of, everything happens for a reason, but something genuinely, practically useful that this specific experience developed in you that less intense experiences might not have. You learn to read people at depth, the sustained effort of trying to understand what was happening beneath the avoidance surface, decoding behavior, interpreting patterns, distinguishing between what was being communicated and what was actually happening. Developed in you a capacity for emotional reading that is genuinely sophisticated. You understand now, in your body as much as your mind, what defended behavior looks like from the inside of a relationship with it. You understand the specific texture of someone performing composure while experiencing chaos. You understand the difference between someone who is quiet because they're at peace and someone who is quiet because they're containing something. That's not nothing. That's rare perceptual capacity that will serve you in every relationship and every significant human connection you navigate going forward. You learn the specific shape of your own worth through the precise way it was undervalued. This sounds paradoxical, but it's true. Having your value consistently under-recognized, having your needs reframed as excessive, your love treated as pressure, your care received without equivalent reciprocity, taught you something about your value that being appropriately loved might not have taught as clearly. You know now, with unusual specificity, what you bring to connection, what your presence actually does for people, even when they can't acknowledge it, what your love looks like from the inside of receiving it, because you watch someone be transformed by it, even while denying the transformation. The avoidance eventual realization confirmed what you always sensed, and that confirmation, arriving after the difficulty rather than alongside it, lands differently than validation that was always available. It lands as knowledge you earned, knowledge that belongs to you completely. You learned where your limits actually are, not where you thought they were before, not the theoretical limits you might have described prior to this experience, the actual limits, where patience becomes self-erasure, where understanding becomes enabling, where love becomes the thing you're doing instead of the thing you're building together. Most people don't discover their actual limits until they've been tested at their edge. You've been tested at your edge, and the self-knowledge that comes from having been there, from knowing what you can sustain and what ultimately you cannot, from understanding the difference between loving generously and losing yourself in the giving. That self-knowledge is precise in a way that only experience creates. It will protect you going forward in ways that prior theoretical self-knowledge never could. A direct conversation about what comes next. I want to talk to you directly for a moment, not about the avoidant or the psychology or the patterns, but about you and what actually comes next in practical terms. Some of you watching this are in the middle of the dynamic right now, still in contact, still trying to figure out whether what you sense between you is worth continuing to reach toward. For you, the most important thing this video can offer is clarity about what you're actually working with. You're not working with someone who doesn't feel enough. You're working with someone who feels intensely and lacks the capacity to translate that feeling into the sustained, consistent, vulnerable behavior that relationship requires. That's not a problem more patience solves. That's a problem professional therapeutic work solves, work that you cannot do for them and that they haven't, as yet, committed to doing for themselves. The question is not whether the feeling is real. It is. The question is whether you're willing to continue building your emotional life around someone whose capacity hasn't caught up to their feeling, knowing that the gap between feeling and capacity is not something you can close from your side of it. Some of you are in the aftermath. The relationship has ended. You're in the process of rebuilding, and you're watching this because understanding what happened is part of how you make sense of the experience and move through it. For you, This video is confirmation of what your instincts already told you. The connection was real. Your reading of the situation was accurate. The feeling underneath their behavior was there, is there, exactly as you sensed it. Let that confirmation do its work. Let it close the loop on the self-doubt that their behavior opened. And then let it be the last piece of the story about them, after which the story becomes about you, about what you build next, about who you bring your extraordinary capacity to next, about the life that's available to you once you're no longer organizing significant energy around someone who couldn't receive what you were offering. And some of you are further along. The grief has largely run its course. The self-doubt has largely resolved. You're not here because you're suffering. You're here because you're curious, because understanding human psychology is how you process experience, because you want the complete picture of what you lived through. For you, this video is simply the last chapter of a story you've already mostly written. Take what's useful, carry forward the self-knowledge, and trust that where you are now, clearer, more grounded, more precisely aware of what you require and what you offer, is exactly where this experience was always going to bring you if you let it complete itself, rather than interrupting it by returning to what caused it. The final thing worth saying: the avoidant is hiding things from you. They're hiding the intensity of your effect on them, the volume of space you occupy in their internal world, the specific ways you drive them wild in ways they cannot fully manage or contain. They're hiding real feeling behind practiced composure. They're concealing genuine longing behind performed indifference. They're protecting themselves from the exposure of need with a discipline that looks like emotional unavailability, but is actually emotional overwhelm, managed through concealment. All of that is true. All of that matters. And none of it is your responsibility to rescue them from. You cannot reach into someone's defended psychology and retrieve the feeling they're hiding and build a relationship on it. The feeling has to be brought out by them through their own work, their own willingness, their own sustained therapeutic effort to develop the capacity that their feeling deserves to be expressed through. Until that work happens, the feeling stays hidden. Not because you haven't loved them well enough to deserve it, but because the work of revealing it belongs to them in a place you cannot access from the outside, no matter how patiently or how skillfully or how lovingly you try. What you can do is know your own value with the completeness that this experience has offered you. Know that you drive people wild, the right people, the people who recognize depth when they encounter it. Know that your effect is real, even when it goes unacknowledged. Know that the connection you sense is not imagination. Know that the person who is hiding the most significant feeling about you is doing so because you are genuinely, powerfully, almost overwhelmingly significant to them. And that significance deserves to be met by someone capable of expressing it openly, rather than someone whose entire system is organized around keeping it contained. You drove them wild. You are worth being driven wild over. Those two facts are complete, and they belong to you regardless of what they do next, regardless of whether they ever develop the capacity to show you what they've been hiding, regardless of whether the story between you has another chapter or ends exactly here. You were never their secret to keep. You were always the thing worth showing up for, and someone, somewhere, is going to know that from the moment they meet you, and spend every day after making sure you never have to wonder whether what they feel is real. That's not hope. That's just what happens when extraordinary finds available. You are extraordinary. Make yourself available to someone who is.